All right, welcome everybody to the Love First Christians topic study. Today we are studying the topics of guilt and shame. I presume I will have some more people coming on because this was one there, unlike love and forgiveness, where we had slight disagreements, we had a lot of disagreement within our group about the roles of guilt and shame within the Christian community. If you are watching this and not live or are live, either way, you're going to see a link in the description to join our group if you would like to join from any faith, walk of life, perspective, political persuasion. If you just want to be part of a positive community that enjoys having conversations that can be complex without receiving all the blowback and judgment that comes with asking a complex or difficult question, the Love First Christians is a great place to do this. We'd love to have you. You are free to participate in videos like this one. And I am joined today, for now, I have Aaron Goss. Everybody knows him and loves him already, but how you doing today, Aaron?
I'm doing fantastic. And yourself?
Oh, doing well. Just had my 40th birthday. I'm on the other side now.
I know it.
It looks
Happy
a little
birthday.
less embarrassing. Thank you for me to be bald now. I've been bald since I've been Charlie Browning since, Charlie Brown. So I have not had a lot of, now at least I don't have to make an excuse for it. When you hit 40 and you're bald, it's like, yeah, that happens. You know what I mean? It was a little more difficult to explain when I was in high school. So, at least now I actually look the part of a 40-year-old. So it's good. All right, guilt and shame. General topics for study. Aaron, this is just going to be a general conversation. So any thoughts that you have about guilt and shame, their roles, what they mean, what they imply, anything like that?
Yeah, it's a hard one for me because I have never had to deal with, I want to say, the more overt aspects of how guilt and shame can play a role in. I mainly want to talk about like the leading you away from the faith and like, having you come back and everything like that as a recurring motif in our group. And I was fortunate that didn't play a huge role in my leaving of the church, but I understand for a lot of people it played a major role. And I'm definitely eager. I'm hoping more people come on and can talk about that because hearing those stories is kind of just heartbreaking because for me it was just a slow, gradual moving away because of the disconnect that I felt, but it was never related to the guilt and shame. And so I'm interested to hear other people's perspective.
Yeah, I'm eager for them to come on too, and that was my challenge all week because I don't have a lot of positive things to say about guilt and shame. I understand that the feeling of guilt can be inspired by your conscience, and that if you've done something bad, that you kind of feel bad, and that's like a positive thing. But
It can be manipulated.
it can absolutely be manipulated, and the problem is that if you have given, nobody's going to make you feel more guilty than the devil. So if I start playing a guilt game and you're just going to go with whoever makes you feel like more guilty for not listening to what they say, to me that's a war that the devil wins. That's even in like the Bible. Like, oh, that's a battle that the devil wins. That Christ is the one, you come to me, you let go of the guilt, you don't, like, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings. Full assurance, I love that term. Having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience. And that's from Hebrews. And so it's just, that this is the nature of God, is just being like, you don't have to feel bad about that stuff anymore. And I just, of course, I went in preparation for this week, looked up everything that had to do with guilt, shame, ashamed. A lot of the stuff about guilt is more in like the judgment sense, like, are you guilty for committing a sin? And of course, but we're talking more about guilt is a weaponized or utilized, I guess I'll try to be fair as I can to the other side here, utilized tool to try and make somebody change. And I just think that's when the devil is going to wield better than God. As you mentioned, Aaron, it might not be part of your journey, but there's a lot of people in our group and people who are not, who people have left the church permanently. And the weaponization of guilt was a major factor in how they feel. I actually was talking with somebody, I was tagged in a post just yesterday, thankfully it was actually by a fellow atheist, but who respected my beliefs, debating with another atheist about if guilt is intrinsic to Christianity. And their insistence was, it's like, I don't know how it's not. Like, to me, like, guilt and shame are absolutely core parts of this faith. Now, to me, they are not only not, but like actively harmful to the faith.
Yeah. Well, no, okay. So I came into this thinking exclusively about the interpersonal aspect, the human to human aspect of guilt and shame. And you just brought up the devil, and it like that. I didn't even think about that as an aspect, but that makes perfect sense. Like, Jesus has no desire for us to stew in shame and guilt and everything like that. He wants us to be redeemed, and he wants us to cast off sin. And stewing in that shame is absolutely to the devil's benefit. And it's wild that I didn't even make that connection until you mentioned it.
It's all right. I mean, I think a lot of times one of the things that I fault Christians for is that we sometimes talk about the devil to people who not only don't believe in the devil, but then we don't kind of talk about, okay, let's see, what does the devil look like? You know, we don't talk about like psychological manipulation, which is something that's a little easier to grasp and it sounds a little less mythological to people. And so I'm fine with talking about it in terms of like, I think it's the devil's weapon, but I am also fine with talking about it in terms of just like what is psychologically happening. Again, in Hebrews, for the worshipers would have been cleansed once and for all and would no longer have felt guilty for their sins. So this is a big verse to me, because when I was looking through a lot of these verses, what I would find is that it's not just that you're not guilty when you're forgiven. It's the feeling of guilt that God is also addressing, that you don't feel that way anymore. Not just that you are forgiven and that guilt no longer is there, but it's not healthy for you to feel that way anymore. In Psalms, he talks about not just the forgiveness of sin, but says, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. So forgave, like, that feeling that, this is Psalms 32, and I won't go over the entire thing, but just talking about how, like, he feel like his bones hurt. And this is one that relates to me, because I think we've all felt guilty for something before. And just described how his bones hurt, his trouble sleeping, his strength was sapped. We've all been in those guilt cycles before. When we talk about somebody recovering from, like, fighting a drug addiction, that we need to, modern studies have shown that getting people away from the shame cycle is the best way to get them out of it. That a shame cycle, whether it's, masturbation is kind of a famous one for people, like, they get stuck in a shame cycle and it's just, they can't leave it anymore. But even if it's theft or drug addiction or whatever it may be, that shame cycle actually drives you further down into it. And so the problem that I have is when Christians weaponize this faith is they drive somebody further away from them as opposed to bringing them in. And it's not that, we're told that God takes care of it. For me, the prodigal son, the son who runs away, or he doesn't run away, the son who goes away, suffers the natural consequences of his actions. And it doesn't need the father hovering over him being like, tisk, tisk, tisk. Because to me, that would maybe make him be like, you know what? I'd rather eat out of a pig trough and live in a sty than go back to somebody who's just constantly judging me, constantly over my head. There's a lot of ex-Christians who know what I'm talking about when you just have that somebody and you're like, yeah, things would be better at home. Like, they might feed me better, take care of me better, but I'm not going to live at a place with somebody who's just constantly hounding me, constantly making me feel bad about myself. Like, if you're doing something that is actually warranting judgment, that we're told as Christians to leave that to God. God will take care of it. And sure enough, he makes the person, he leads the person to the point where they're eating out of a pig trough, right? Like a bad thing happened to them. We don't have to do that. That's the natural consequences of sin, right? Like
Well,
bad. Go
on
ahead.
that subject, I was going to ask you, going back to that person that you were discussing with yesterday I don't know if you said it was Twitter or not. I don't remember. But what is the relationship between guilt and shame and sin in the theological sense? Because like when you hear a lot in the Old Testament, like when individual people felt either the collective guilt of their people or the individual guilt, they'd like wear sackcloths and they'd like fast for days or weeks on end and everything like that. And I think it explicitly says, but if it doesn't explicitly say, it at least implies that they were in shame of either their actions or their people's actions or whatever. And now obviously they were in shame because of the sin. Is that a healthy kind of shame in that instance, those were taking place, or is that not healthy?
Yeah, I mean, and so this is where I would say, like, if you cheat on your spouse, unless you're a sociopath, you should feel some amount of shame. My issue is, do we want to create a systemic process where that person constantly feels ashamed, or should we even think of ourselves the applicators of that shame? Like, you don't feel bad enough about it yet. Let me really rub this in your face, right? Like, or is our attempt to get them forgiven, get them healthy, and have them leave that shame at the door? You know what? Because I get what you're saying, and I guess I would side with that being like a healthy shame. That because there are verses in the Bible about guilt and feeling bad for your sins, and like that's fine, right? Like the prodigal son feels bad for his sins. My issue is I don't want to be the role of the applicator of that shame.
Okay,
like,
right.
Like that conscience, that Holy Spirit, that'll do the job for me. I don't want to be the guy who's like, let me really rub your nose in it, rub your face in it. That's how I feel about it. I mean, is that roughly kind of what you thought about it too?
Yeah, I know we talked about forgiveness at one point, and I'm wondering like what is the interpersonal play between being not ready to forgive somebody versus shaming them, and like how are those things connected and how are they different?
Yeah. We did discuss like forgiveness in depth. These things are tied together, so I have no issue like talking about them both still on this episode. But like, yeah, like that this is how you get, to me, this is like a bad shame cycle, is when you say I keep stealing from my family in order to, for any reason really, but let's just say to buy, I don't want to make it about drugs, right? So let's just say it's about,
like, of some sort.
Right, buying Pokemon cards, and I keep stealing from my mom.
That's literally what I was going for. Is like buying Magic the Gathering.
Right, some wasteful tabletop game that is fun, but you shouldn't blow all your money on it. You know what I mean? And so this is, if you keep stealing from them, then yes, you should feel ashamed. For me, here's the issue: is if forgiveness looks like that person holding my sin over my head for the rest of my life, then that is a shame cycle that does not cause me to want to change, because I feel bad already. I've been stealing, and if it's just like, if I confess to the stealing, and this is why I think we get so like lies cropping up when like Christians call people out, because what they see then is I've been caught in a sin, and instead of, hey, here's a door. Hey, like what the Bible encourages, leave your sin, like put it down, drop it, forget about it, go through life as a better person, go and sin no more, right? Like, just don't worry about this stuff anymore. Like the verses that we can find are often linked to worry and like stress in the Bible about this. So like when you don't want to stress and you don't want to worry, a lot of that guilt and shame is causing people to worry and to be afraid and be it's a pressure. And so if I think that forgiveness looks like, if me acknowledging it just means I have to live with the totality of my sin for the rest of my life, then I might as well just keep sinning and experience, as opposed to a systematic shame, just an occasional shame when I steal, as opposed to looking at somebody in the eyes and every time they see me, they go, oh, that's the thief. You know what I mean? Like, you're a thief. That's what you are. And that's like no way to live. We look at this especially for like sexual deviancy. Adultery is probably the number one on this list, but any type of what I would say is like sexual immorality. We can get into, unfortunately, a lot of this is, I'm just going to say right off the bat, I don't think being gay is sexually immoral. If you read the Old Testament and you come through thinking that sex is only between like a man and a wife, read the Old Testament again and try it again and kind of reshape your philosophy there. So I don't want to say sexual immorality. I believe sexual immorality is a real thing. I think you can be dishonest about it. I think you can break a lot of agreements and hearts and trust with it. But please, when I say sexual, I'm giving a long disclaimer here. When I say sexual immorality, I'm aware that's a veil to kind of be like anti-gay, and that's not at all what I'm saying here. So, but I am going to say, like, if you have been experiencing, let's just say, feelings of lust or envy or jealousy, right? Like those sexual feelings that are wrong and not in a healthy place, and not being like, that girl should be having sex with me, not with that guy, and that kind of thing. It's like, okay, I want you to be able to acknowledge that so that you can leave that shame behind, as opposed to just being like, oh, you're a gross little disgusting pervert, which is when a lot of guys get caught for their first time. This is kind of the reaction they get from their families, and it causes them to have very unhealthy views about sex and sexuality that are not even close to biblical. Because they want to avoid that cycle of shame that their parents would apply to them. You as a fellow man, I'm sure you can understand, even if you haven't been caught, I'm sure you can understand the feeling of being ashamed for even being a normal kid,
Right. No. I had some pretty formative experience similar to that. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So Bradley or Bray. No one who shamed me has ever changed me. No one I've shamed has ever changed. People change when their own conscience shames them, and the only thing we can do is lead by example. So this is kind of what I was going to say is like the meat and potatoes of things for me. When preparation for this, I asked my friends on social media and was just like, hey, can you think of an example where shame applied by like a Christian community has led you to change? And I got nothing. And I plenty of interactions, and of course, a lot of people with the exact opposite experience. I don't want to ever say that, like, as you mentioned, Aaron, that like, I think there is a role for it. If you do something bad and you feel bad for it, that is a sign, if anything, that's a sign of a healthy conscience, right? Like, I did something bad and I feel bad that I did something bad. But the sign of the unhealthy conscience is I did something bad. I am always going to be that bad. I am a fallen, and this is where like the Christians become a problem, right? I'm not a new creation. I'm fallen. I got baptized, but I still struggle with sin. Maybe I'm just always going to be a scumbag loser. And this is where the devil just goes, cool. As soon as you acknowledge that, there's nothing I can't do, right? Because you're just acknowledged that you're fallen. And so every time you just sin, you're like, yeah, I'll feel bad about it, but I'm a fallen man. What can I do? And you just grow into this perpetually sinning Christian. Go ahead.
I was thinking there might be room though, and for like in a therapeutical sense, helping people introspect on ways that they may not have realized that people should be ashamed, not in a way of like trying to castigate them, but to get them to just introspect on where they might have fallen and not realized it.
I mean, then this is, and you can kind of fix me up if I'm wrong here, but this is kind of like if you've got two kids, one of them takes the other one's lollipop, and you kind of got to be like, well, have you thought about who you took the lollipop from and the ways that you've hurt them? Like that's an appropriate time to bring up, like, maybe allow yourself to have that shame, right? Like, because you're kind of automatically closing the avenue just because you want the lollipop so much that
Right.
you kind of have to be like, how do you think they felt? And when you remind them of that, that's when I guess you could say they feel shame. Like, and usually they do start, crying and they feel bad and everything like that. They'd repress that. So I do think there is a place for reminding somebody of that, right? Like to be like, you should think that without suddenly being like, and this is who you are now. And because I think
there's no the outlet for it.
Yeah, I think what you do is to just be like, feel that. And now that you feel that, you don't want to feel that anymore. Let me help you not feel that anymore. I guess we'll get into some of the specifics. I held off for as long as I could, but if they don't join us, then they're not here to defend it. And there's nothing I can do. But I've been honest about this. The more I've studied this week, the worse I felt about this. I mean, I just don't. When we study psychology, and this is one of the things that I tell Christians all the time, that there are coercive ways to get people to change their minds, to have undue influence over them, and there are very effective ways. In fact, the most effective ways to get people to change their minds are all bad. You threaten their lives, you threaten their social circles. And in this case, we don't have, hopefully, too many people whose lives are threatened. Although I will say, if it's like, hey, if you're going to be gay, you don't get to live under my roof, that absolutely is threatening somebody's life. That you go out, you don't have a roof over your head, you die, right? Like no food, you die. So this does happen to some people where their lives are threatened. But oftentimes, I mean, the social circle is probably the more common experience, which is you don't get to be part of this church community anymore if you're a sinner, which is not at all the way the primitive church operated. Rife with sinners. And this is not to say that they encourage sin, but simply that somebody who was in sin was welcome to show up and learn and be blessed. Even if they didn't intend to convert, was a place that they could like talk about what they're going through in life with somebody who understood, and with the avenue always open to them. And like, I see this as an encouragement. Like the reason this anti-shame thing to me is so important is because it's like, I don't have to tell you anything. If you've been killing people, there's something happening in your soul and your conscience that feels funky. And so if I give you be like, don't you want to not feel funky anymore? I think a lot of people are going to jump at that opportunity, as opposed to just be like, you funky man, you disgusting, despicable headed. I mean, this is really just reaffirming what their spirit's already telling them anyway. They're bad, right? Like they messed up. We're all fallen, right? Like, and we look at these verses like all have fallen short of the glory of God. And instead of saying, oh, well, if we've all fallen, then I shouldn't beat myself up so bad, which is, if you look at the context of these verses, is largely what they're talking about. Instead, we look at them and say, oh, so every single one of us should feel bad because we've all fallen, because we're all guilty of like original sin. We all have within us the capacity to sin. So therefore, we are all disgusting, evil, horrible, not wanted people, as opposed to the people that while we were still in sin, Christ died for us and gave his life for us because he loves us so much, even when we were sinners. And it's the competition between those two types of Christians that is really battling it out for the soul of Christianity at the moment. And this is why I see it as so negative. When we study psychology, to go back to this point, like the most effective ways to get people to change their minds are things that the Bible forbids. So, and Christ forbids, because we have the higher calling. We have the more difficult task to change people's minds, not with threats of force, threats of hell, threats of violence, threats of cutting off their food, threats of making them social losers. Instead, we're called to change them by love, by the opposite of shame, by forgiveness. We're called to change them by acceptance and non-judgment. Now, you can change somebody's mind via judgment, but the problem is people that do that generally don't become more Christian. They become less Christian. This is a weapon that the devil will always wield better than God will. And so this is why I just see that nobody's going to convert to Christianity and stay a Christian because they felt bad about it. Like it's something that they feel good about. This is not like buying a car where once you sign the line and I'm a scummy salesperson that I can be like, hey, I just got away with it. They bought the car. You're free to leave your faith at any time. Everybody listening to this, whatever faith you are, is free to leave that faith at any time. So when you walk out the door, if you just say, boy, that was a gross experience, I might have signed on the dotted line just now, but the thing is, I can burn this contract at any time. So your faith is really, it's a tenuous thing. You're not,
but you're also making that sale harder for the future salesperson, the honest salesperson.
Right. To be like, actually, this is a very good car. You've just been told very bad things about it. And it's those bad things that made you sign the first time. And now I have to preach like exactly the opposite message and also still get you to sign. Yeah, that's a tough thing. I mean, I am overwhelmed that there are so many people who have kind of had the same journey that I have, where they are raised in this conservative, repressive version of Christianity. They leave. And then they come back, but they don't really come back. I almost want to say they go past it, right? Like it's not like they're getting back on the same mountain they were before. It's a totally different mountain. Yeah. They're both called Christianity, but you could not be further away. In fact, I was much closer to my bad version of Christianity when I didn't call myself a Christian at all than now when I call myself a Christian. You know what I mean? Like that valley in between the mountains, if I'm in the middle of the valley, I'm still much closer to the old version than the new version. Like, so it is not a surprise to me that I get along with a lot of like atheists, Buddhists, Taoists, Hindu, Muslims, much better now than I did before, because what the Christian I was before was really a flawed, hateful, bigoted thing. And I'm so past it. And I think a lot of it has to do with that shame cycle that kept me there. But then as soon as I got freedom on my own, I just left it. Like I was like, as soon as nobody's forcing me to stay there, nobody can threaten my life or my social circles or whatever. Like I'm gone, like why stay? And so these coercive relationships don't work especially when we talk about a personal relationship with God. You might stay like a church attending Christian for your entire life, but you might not be a Christian in your soul as soon as you're like, well, I just go here on Sundays because it's a community thing. Like that might be the best you've got. We got Patty joining us here as well. Hi, Patty.
Hey there. Sorry I'm late.
Well, that's okay. We know this is a quick turnaround for you. We're always happy to have you.
Actually, I went to a restaurant, met some friends.
Oh, good. Good. Well, Aaron and I are not big on shame and guilt. And so we've had a lot of the Aaron did bring up, and I think appropriately, that there is a time to feel bad about doing a bad thing. But this is something that usually is applied by God or applied by the world, getting people stuck in shame cycles. When we study both pornography or drug addiction or whatever it may be, a shame cycle is a great way to make sure the person never leaves that thing they're doing. So it's a counterintuitive thing. I understand we're trying to create a shame cycle to drive somebody out of it. And in reality, it's sinking them into it. It's tying a weight around it and makes it more difficult to leave. That's kind of the one positive we've given to the element of shame at all. You can just give us your general thoughts about this one, Patty. We're still kind of talking generics.
Okay, so I think I don't know where you stand on this. I have kind of mixed feelings on shame. One, I think shame is a horrible thing if you wallow in it. It's a terrible thing because you can really go down into some really dark tunnels with it. But it's not necessarily a bad thing because it kind of does checks and balances, right? I mean, if you think about shame, because if you never feel shame, you're kind of you're kind of on this island of narcissism, aren't you? Right? I mean, it's because shame is like kind of like that check and balances of, oh my gosh, what have I done? I'm mortified at my own behavior and it must be corrected. Hopefully you're thinking it must be corrected. I mean, this is what drives us to to change sometimes. I mean, it's that moment of just deep emotional regret and just disgust at our own behavior, and moves us into change. I mean, that's genuinely what shame should do. If shame is driving you into self-flagellation, I mean, then you got to stop that. But shame for the, if it's done in a healthy way and it's used in a healthy way, it's not really a bad thing. I mean, it's, I think of like times when I've been, as a child, been ashamed, or done things as an adult where I've been ashamed, and it's driven positive change in my life. I'm not necessarily ashamed of being ashamed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does, and it actually speaks to something that I was thinking about. That I wasn't sure if I was going to bring it up because it's kind of tangential, but I was thinking about edge cases, and Patty brought it up specifically by name. I was wondering, how do you, in a loving Christian manner, speak to people who have mental disorders that cause them to feel no shame? Patty brought up narcissism, but like sociopathy or something like that.
Yeah.
If they don't have that internal retrospection, how do you reach them on an emotional level? I mean, even those people should be able to come to Christ.
Yeah.
True. If we're talking like a full-on, like, I find that there's a lot of narcissism that can be untaught.
Right. I mean, can I just stop for a second? Because I want to throw something out because, and again, because one of the things like I was going for my master's on was an MSW, which is a master's in sociology, where you study a whole lot of psychology and human behavior. And I think the term narcissism gets thrown around a lot because a true narcissist is actually, it is actually a mental disorder, and it does not, when we use
it's not a personality trait.
Yeah. A lot of times people use the term narcissism because they just think that person is extremely self-centered, and that's not narcissism. So people who are self-centered and they don't necessarily have a mental disorder. And there's a difference between a psychopath and a sociopath. A sociopath can be unlearned. A psychopath, that's an entirely different mental disorder. So very few people fall on those very strong mental disorders. So I don't like using the term narcissist or psychopath, because both of them are very strong mental disorders, and both of them actually require somebody much more intelligent than me who spent a lot of time with that person to make that mental diagnosis. So I'm going to assume everybody that we talk about is not on that level of the spectrum and has learned their behavior, which means it can be unlearned. So go ahead.
Well, so what we should look into is something called neuroplasticity, which is the ability for a brain to change how it naturally networks.
Yeah.
And this is something that is very understudied, because I think usually the issue that we have is we give people a diagnosis and just say, that's the way you are. I'll go ahead and bring up like a very controversial set of cases, but like, why not? You guys are grown up enough to talk about it. You guys are grown up enough to listen about it. We got plenty of listeners already, so bear with me. But like when we study something like pedophilia, and most of the time they say, this is who I am. It's what I'm attracted to, and there's nothing I can do about it. It's actually fundamentally untrue. Now, a lot of people think that this is like a straight person and learning to be gay, or a gay person learning to be straight. The truth is, it's actually not like that at all. Most of the time when you are a pedophile, it has to do with missing rights of adulthood. And then you seek out other people who've likewise missed those rights. You look at a lot of people in Hollywood who have had pedophilic relationships, and I believe all of them, you can find some way that their childhood was robbed from them as well. And I don't just mean like they themselves have been molested, although that is overwhelmingly true in many of these cases, but they didn't get to progress as normal people. So what happens is when you are in third grade, you have a crush on fellow third graders. And then when you're in high school, you have a crush on high schoolers and college students. And I just turned 40. We talked about this.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much. I have a crush on 40-year-old women, right? Like it is like at about my range. And the rationale and the reason this changes, this is why grandparents like can get together without like barfing. Like, of course, you as a child thinking about getting with somebody who looks like your grandparent is disgusting. And that's good. Like that's healthy, right? Like that should be it. So the thing is this study of neuroplasticity, what we can do is just say like, okay, your neurons are not, what you're doing and the way you're seeing things, they are not going to a natural or good place. They're going to this place because something has happened to you. And this is actually an incredibly, I mean, I say incredibly, it takes work, but this is actually an incredibly fluid thing. That is something that can be fixed. And this is something that you can get brought up when you realize, when you have that understanding. And then when you work with your neurons, the great part about will is you can combat the place your neurons naturally go to. And then it takes work at first, but your brain, much like with erosion, this is how they describe it a lot, which is why I use this terminology when we talk about neurology. When water starts going down one path, have you noticed on the side of a hill, if you've ever been in the rain, that it starts following that same path? It takes a little work at first to say hey guys, this is your path, right? You might have to dig out the path, but as soon as the water goes down this path instead of this other path, it's a natural process. So this isn't something where it's just this is who you are, you're disgusting, you're broken, you can't ever be fixed. When we talk about things like psychopathy, sociopathy, pedophilia, even just chronic lying, narcissism, the idea that this is who these people are forever is widely inaccurate. And the other thing is, and this goes back to the shame part, with the pedophiles, what I've described is bringing them knowledge, it's bringing them healing, it's getting them counseling, it's getting them therapy, it's bringing them understanding and why their brain is the way there is. What doesn't work to fix that? Shame. Right,
that is very true.
They probably, and if they are humans, they probably are sick about being attracted to kids, right?
Probably, yes.
It's not a fun thing. Wouldn't you be having more fun to not have to go through the process of being attracted to little kids and just be attracted to people your own age who are your peers and colleagues? Of course, these are healthier, more positive relationships. So I don't need to bring them a great deal of shame. What I need to do is bring them a great deal of healing and understanding. And so, Aaron, you're completely right that these people are reachable with the word of Christ. In fact, I would argue they're some of the most need of our help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I'd have broached the subject if you hadn't brought it up, but because, man, it's tough to talk about. But it's on this subject. I despise the wood chipper discourse because
I'm with you on that one too, actually, Aaron. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, because the idea, we're not even talking about shame at this point because we're talking about people who haven't even offended. We're talking about people who struggle with it but haven't actually acted upon it. They can't come out and talk about it and get help because if they come out and talk about it, they're immediately branded.
Yeah.
And they can't, and so then they inevitably offend. And at that point, we justify it. Well, clearly they're psychopaths. They couldn't have, because they couldn't reach out and get help before they inevitably gave in to their temptations.
Yeah. My bachelor's degree is in criminal justice criminology. And one of the things that you learn is you learn that people who have sexual imbalances such as pedophilia and things like that, they are among the hardest to rehabilitate. We understand that, and we understand that because your sexual preferences are deeply ingrained within you, and so we get that. But we also understand that doesn't mean that person inherently is unreachable. And so this is why that when they are in criminal justice criminology, one of the first things that they do is that we talk about things that are therapy and programs and things like that they use to reach people for this, because this is the whole study, because we understand that what you don't want to do is you don't want to just leave them out there so that they can develop into becoming predators, because that is the worst case of all scenarios. And so when you say the wood chipper line out there, that is literally what they are doing when they use that type of language, is that they are telling these people that you only have really two options in life, is A, act on it, or B, be quiet. And neither one of them is good, because if you stay quiet and you never go for help, you never go for counseling, and you internalize, chances are you will probably end up taking your own life, because this is a terrible thing to live with inside of yourself. If you act on it, then you're saying, well, we're going to murder you for this. And it's like, well, good God, think about this, people. You are not giving these people, you're not giving anybody who has this any option to seek any other remedy because of the social stigma that you put on them. This is not the type of society that we should be living in. We should be giving people options that if they want to move out of where they are, that they have a society in which we welcome them to walk into an exploration of what caused this, why am I like this, and how do I get out of this? Because the shame they are probably feeling is greater than anything you could lay on them. Leave them alone. Let them work this out themselves. Leave them alone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and when they know, as you mentioned, Aaron, this wood chipper thing, I hate it. I'm glad you both dislike it as well.
God, I can't imagine any rational person would like this. It's obnoxious.
I think it's more about self-serving and being holier than thou and devout than it is about doing anything to benefit the victims.
It's like, look at me, I'm so great, I want to wood chipper somebody. It's like, think about literally, I want you to think about that. Think about just like how gory and horrible and awful it is to throw somebody in a wood chipper, hearing them scream and awful. Think about that. I mean, really, you think that makes you noble? It makes you a monster. Monsters want to wood chipper people. Okay, there it is. Go ahead.
Fantastic verse. I was saving it. This is the moment. This is its moment. 2 Corinthians 7:10. Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death. So these are the two sorrows that we've been discussing here, right? Is the one that you say, I have a godly sorrow. It leads me to repentance, that leads me to salvation, and it leaves no regret. I have no bad feelings about the journey that got me here. Of course, did I wish I had never sinned? Yeah, we all wish we were perfect, right? But you have no regrets for those sins anymore. Worldly sorrow is the wood chipper. Yeah. Worldly sorrow is feel bad for who you are. Now, anytime somebody brings up the wood chipper, I can almost guarantee it's judgment, right? And if you think that pedophilia is deeply ingrained, and as you mentioned, Patty, sexuality is like a deeply ingrained thing. It takes work.
Yeah.
Not a simple thing, right? This isn't like, there's some sins that have different levels of getting over it. There's a lot of people who don't struggle with some sins, say drunkenness, and they got drunk one night, they barfed, they were like, I'm never doing this again. And they don't do it again, right? Okay, that's easy. For some people, drunkenness is not that easy, right? It's a little, so we got to think about this. Yeah. But with judgment, how deeply ingrained is that in some people, not only in the Christian culture, and it is overwhelming in the Christian culture, outside of going to church on Sunday.
Judgment is highly represented in Christianity.
Right. I mean, outside of what was the top things that people think about Christians outside the church? Number one is we go to church on Sunday. I'm cool with that. Number two is we're judgmental. Right. So this is overwhelmingly, people have this experience with Christians that we're extremely judgmental. Have you ever tried to work to make somebody less judgmental or to try to make yourself less judgmental? I am telling you, that is as much neuroplasticity as trying to get pedophilia out of somebody. Now, some people might do the dabble with judgment and they're like, oh, gross, it's not for me, as with the drunkenness thing that I described. But more often than not, especially with the wood chipper people, that judgment is deep, deep down within them. And they would rather dismiss the Bible verses that tell you not to be judgmental. If you're involved with the Christian community, I guarantee you've seen this before. That instead of just seeing those Bible verses that condemn being judgmental and going, yeah, that's probably right, I need to knock it off. Or by saying I don't know, they just say, I don't believe those Bible verses. I prefer this Bible verse that tells me it's okay to discern between good and evil. And it's like, well, of course, judging between good and evil is fine. This is judging human beings, man. What's he doing?
This is judgmental, because I was a really judgmental person. So I'm going to speak on behalf of judgmental people, because I'm a reformed judgmental person. The way the judgmental person gets around it is that they say, no, wait, you don't understand. It's not that I am judgmental. I am speaking for the Lord, and the Lord does not approve of this. So it is not judging. If you have a problem with me, you have a problem with God.
Yeah. I've
right?
heard that
I'm
exact
not being
same.
judgmental, right? No, no. See, I live that whole judgment. I ruined a lot of people's lives with my judgmentalness, which, by the way, is my shame. I have a lot of shame over that, and it has taken me years, and I still am. I still. There are moments where I just like I'll be filled with deep shame over how horrible I treated people and how many lives I ruined through my judgmentalness. I ruined my own life through it. I mean, not just other people's lives, but I managed to do a pretty good job of wrecking my life through it. So it's like when we talk about like the wood chipper people, it's like, you know, the only thing worse than being a wood chipper person is being a judgmental person, which, by the way, leads you to being a wood chipper person. So it's like wood chipper people, you are on that really dark path. I know of which I speak.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing your personal story there, because I think it's one that more Christians, that if you're hearing this, you need to understand that not only is it bad, but that there is hope for it, right? Like,
Yeah,
I don't
you
want
can
to
get out
turn
of it.
around and be hypocritical when I talk about shame. Okay, we recognize that you shouldn't be a judgmental person, but I don't want to just have you be like, well, you're a judgmental person. It's who you are. What can we do? You know, this is part of the becoming a new creation process, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can become better. You can get better. You can stop doing this. Patty, we talked about judgment before, and I brought this up last time as well, that like my mom was somebody who was absolutely, my dad shouldn't have, you know, did what he did and everything like that, but she was judgmental, and she changed and is a great person now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and it's just, it's hard. It's not like this was an overnight process. It took work. It took a lot of confrontation. She did go through some guilty feeling nights, but it's over and it's done. And I get no benefit out of holding that over my mom's head for the rest of her life. And so, like, odds are, if you're listening to my words right now, you probably have some deep ingrained sin, and you know what it is. You know that thing I'm talking about. And it's tough. Like, it is a tough thing to just say, like, I don't know how I'm going to get that out of there. This is not a splinter under your fingernail where you just get some tweezers and it hurts for a little bit. This is something that's in your bone, you know? And then it's like, I'm going to have to reopen this wound, climb on in there, grab something from out of my bone and pull this out of there. It's a tough thing, but it is worth it. It will make you healthier, and you will no longer, like, for me, the anti-shame part is the liberation part of the Christ, right? Like, you just say, once it's gone, you're better. I no longer have to treat you like somebody who has that little thing in your leg anymore, right? Or whoever had that thing in his leg. Like, God forgets about it. I'll forget about it. That's the way we're supposed to forgive people. So if there's some sin that you're struggling with, get it, treat it, let it go. Don't let yourself spend these nights of shame, because I'm telling you that as you feel more shame about this thing that you have within you, you're going to sink deeper into it.
Yeah.
This is the trick of the devil, right? It's a rock. As opposed to a driving force that gets you out, it's a sinking force that makes it difficult to get back to the surface. So yeah, I think, Aaron, I'm glad you opened up this whole line of thinking, because, like, yeah, narcissists, pedophiles, psychopaths, sociopaths, kleptomaniacs, judgmental, all of them have places here in the church. You have places in the church, not right now. You have a place in the church, right now, not later. God died for who you are right now. He still loves you and still thinks you're a valid person for who you are right now. All we're asking is that you take this bad thing, drop it, move on. And you know what? If you drop it, I drop it. That's it. You know, we're done with it. And we don't need to keep harping on this person that you used to be. If anything, you gain a beautiful, wonderful testimony like the one Patty just gave us. You know, just say, listen, let me tell you about this. I think C.S. Lewis is fantastic. And he talked a lot about, I'm sure I've talked with you guys about this before, but Mere Christianity says, people are like, well, why don't you talk more about, like, gambling? And he's like, well, I haven't struggled with gambling. I've struggled with, like, everything else, but not really gambling. So I don't really have a testimony about it. And so this thing that, like, is you're going to let go of. I mean, when we get somebody off of drugs, who leads the intervention process? Somebody else who has done this journey before. You become more powerful because of this pain that you had, this difficulty. I think that's integral to the purpose of this life. Otherwise, just keep us all in heaven and don't give us any challenges, right? Instead, we gain a testimony for the difficulties and the pain of sin, and then the understanding of why it's important to struggle with it, give into it, lose sometimes, then confront it and get better and win that fight gradually and fight your way back up the mountain. And how much more of an appreciation you have for climbing a mountain if you're born at the bottom of it versus when you're born at the top. You know, like it's night and day.
Speaking of, as we were talking about pedophilia earlier and having somebody who's gone through it, we should be at a point in society where we have AA, but for pedophiles. And it should be socially acceptable to, like, I want to grow from this. I don't want to be this kind of person. And people that formerly struggled with the exact same thing to help counsel them and help get them out of it. But we can't do that as a society when we're so focused on throwing in wood chippers. And I know we are harping on it and we've started to move away from it, but I got to say just one more time, if your goal is to protect kids, like you claim your goal is to protect kids, you can't protect kids with wood chippers, because the only time you ever get a wood chipper on somebody is after they've already offended.
Right.
Patty and I just jinxed on the right, but yeah.
Yeah, right. Go ahead, no, Aaron, you hit on a very, very, very positive point. Is that, if you make it available for people to come to you when they're struggling, they will come to you when they're struggling, not when they've given into their struggles. Right. I mean, you want people to be able to come to you when they're in when they're in that moment of struggling and they don't know where to go and they don't know what to do, not when they've already given into it and they're just like, well, there's nowhere to go. I have nowhere to go. I'm just going to give in to everything. It's like, no, actually, we want you to have a place to go. We want you to have a safe harbor. We want you to be able to. It's again, like AA. It's a really good example. It saved so many people from reoffending. And by the way, I have family members that AA has saved their life, and I've been, I've helped them through it. Although I've never had that problem, but I had a family member who asked me to be their sponsor, through it, and I saw how hard it was for them. But when they were getting ready to drink, they would call me, and sometimes at 3:00 in the morning, and I would talk to them and talk them through it so that they wouldn't drink. And I realized how valuable it was to have somebody there with you the whole time while you were struggling in that moment. And that is, when you say like there should be an AA, it's like I actually see the value to something like that, and not just for something like pedophilia, but for all types of behavior. That there should be that when you're in the midst of that struggle, and having people there to reach out to in your community, and I mean within your community, the other people that are having that struggle, or just people that can help you to be there with you and bring you out of it. I mean, that's really what the family of God is about, is to protect you and to put their arms around you so that you are better, you get better, and help you through your struggles. Not to be there and condemn you once the struggle, you've given into your struggle and you have nowhere to go but further down into that deep, dark hole. That's terrible.
If a child steals $10 from me, I have enough money. I can guarantee the pain of me losing $10 is not nearly the agony and the shame that they feel for getting caught. Right. It's not proportionate. Like, unless we're dealing with like a psychopathy, sociopathy kind of situation.
We're just a rotten little brat.
Right. It's a rotten thing to do,
Yeah.
So like for me, this is the powerful tool. Like, God gives us to it. Christ, gives it to us. But not for us to use against others. He uses it for us to, judge against ourselves. And this is like the kind of the self-correction by just being like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that to my parent. I shouldn't have done that to my brothers and sisters. Now people don't trust me as much. Like, now I've created this difficult thing. Brief Bible passage out of Romans 8. What then shall we say in response to these things? For if God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all these things? Who will bring any charge against those whom God has chosen? It is God who justifies. Who then is the one who condemns? No one. Christ Jesus, who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and is also interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor demons, nor the present, nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Now, there's a few verses in there that are pretty famous that get quoted an awful lot, but I bring this up in terms of guilt because we're told specifically we're not to be condemned, and that he specifically goes against the passage. It's written here, for your sake, we're be considered as sheep to be slaughtered, right? Like we're just worthless, bleeding, sad people. And that this verse says, no, I know that's what you wrote down, but that's not the way it is. We're more than conquerors as long as we have God in our lives.
Yeah.
And that's how we should treat people, like to get them to this place where they're considered more than conquerors, as opposed to condemning them for being conquered. Because if Christ Jesus is there, and we're told that not only on earth did he not condemn anybody, but in heaven, he's actually going to intercede on all of our behalfs, all of us. He's going to make his case for all of us and step in for us and not condemn us. Then if that's our example, shouldn't we try to mimic that example? And also not be people who condemn all the time, but people who encourage you to improve all the time. And then understand, because I'm sure when Jesus intercedes, with some people it's going to be like, yeah, they were a liar and they died a liar. Is Christ going to be like, listen, I understand this guy. I created him. Let me tell you what's going on in his head. Let me tell you what's up with his parents. Let me tell you what's up with siblings. Christ makes excuses for us, what we would call excuses. I mean, you know what I mean? On behalf of us when we have this sin. Now, that sin is still not a good thing, but Christ does everything he can to explain it, as opposed to say, you're condemned for that. Even sins, right? So if I'm talking about legit sins, legit bad stuff, and believe me, guys, I don't want this to get twisted at all. Pedophiles is a real bad thing. Pedophilia is really bad. You should not have that. Being judgmental, really bad thing. Drunkenness, bad things. I don't mean, with my brand of Christianity, sometimes it's like, oh, what? So nothing's a sin anymore? And I would argue that actually sinlessness, as opposed to being a check bunch of check boxes, make sure you don't do these things. It's a vast ocean of ways that you can go wrong. Life is complex and you're going to make some wrong steps, and there's a lot of wrong steps that you can make. And so I would actually say that the opportunity to sin is more, in my opinion. It's just, I don't want somebody to look at all those ways that they can misstep and sin and then go, you know what? I'm just not going to play, by either not being a Christian, or when you see Christians who withdraw themselves from the world and then they fail the verse that says to be in and not of the world because they fail to be in the world. And I would rather see a Christian participate in the world, make mistakes, get better, constantly improve, focus on normalizing a redemption, process every day. I sin pretty much every day. And I just go, okay, this is part of my repentance process. This is part of getting better. And I do get a lot better. I am much better than the person who is sinning hundreds of times a day than I was decades ago, right? I am getting better. But it's still, I'm not perfect, right? I'm still here. If you're perfect, you get ascended. That's something the Bible tells us, and I'm still here. So obviously, I still struggle.
Not perfect.
Not perfect. Still got problems, right? Right? And these aren't cute little oh, I love too much things. No, I got real problems, right? We all got real problems, real stuff.
I don't love
too
much.
Yeah.
My problem is I just care too much.
Oh
I work too hard. It's my biggest weakness.
What did you just say, Aaron?
My biggest weakness is I work too hard.
Oh, yes.
My toxic trait is I clean my house too much.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. My toxic trait is I dislike a bad movie. You're just, please.
My toxic trait is I work out too much.
Yeah. If you think that's the worst part about you, try again. I tell you what, then maybe that narcissism we talked about might actually apply, right? Then maybe it's time to explore that your toxic trait's a little more toxic than you're letting on here.
Yeah, I like that part.
Yeah. let's see here. Any other thoughts that either you have? Like, while we've been talking about when it comes to guilt, and I want to bring shame into this as well. Shame cycles. Do you think, you know what? I'll make this a more specific question as opposed to being this open-ended, because this is something that we discussed. Is there any good way for a Christian community to wield shame and get people to change? What would that look like? What would the boundaries be? Since, we've all kind of talked about how shame, guilt and shame are pretty problematic. How do you limit it, use it? How do you make it a tool? If you can make it a tool, what are some right things to do if you're in kind of a Christian community and you want to be like, well, I do want this person to feel bad for a sin. I think it might get them jump started on their redemption process.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is not targeting individuals. It's targeting organizations. And specifically, as you've talked about many times, targeting the Christian faith, like the Christianity and how the church uses shame and shaming them for their actions,
Shame the shamers.
Yeah, shame the shamers. Yeah, exactly. Like not on an individual level, but these kind of conversations where we're talking about, the damage that's been done to the Christian faith as a result of the shamers.
Yeah. That's a good point, because you think of like the epistles being directed at churches, and Paul is encouraging them to do better, but certainly not holding back on what they've messed up or failed to do. Your thoughts on that, Patty?
Actually, I have used shame to change behavior. I will admit I have done it, but I haven't done it in a way where it is to shame the person. It is to more use it for empathy. And I'll give you an example of when I did it with somebody, and I'll try not, because the person, it was a very powerful moment when it happened, but it dealt with an individual, and it actually it was thievery, and it was with a child. Well, not with a child, but the person was a teenager. And the individual was very angry because their parent, when they found out, the person actually got away with the stealing. They stole candy, and they got away with it. And their parent found out, their father found out. And they were very angry when their father found out, and marched them back to the store and made them go to the store owner and hand them back the candy and admit that they had stolen it and apologize. And this person was enraged over it, and came to me and told me they were enraged that their parent had done this. And the reason why is that they didn't understand why they just couldn't, why the father made them humiliate themselves like that. And because to them it was like, okay, punish me at home. I get it. I got caught stealing. Like, they were willing to take that punishment, but to them, what the father did was humiliation. And of course, like, we're all listening, we know exactly why the father did that, right? I mean, because we know that what the child did was very wrong, and the father did that so the child would realize that it was the thievery that was wrong. And I asked the child, I said, do you understand, like when you told the father what you did, what the father thought about how they must have raised you? Like, what was their first thought about what type of child did I raise that they would think it was okay to steal from another person? And the child like stopped for a second and said, well, no, it had nothing to do with how they raised me. I just wanted it. And it was like, no, that wouldn't be what my first thought would be as a parent. My first thought would be, what type of child did I raise that my child thought it was okay to take from another person?
That's my thought. As you're telling that story, that's exactly what I was thinking, is the father immediately feels that shame.
Right. Because that's what I would think as a parent too, is I would be so ashamed of my child for stealing. I mean, just devastated that my child would do this. Like, my child would think it would be okay to take from anyone. Like,
Well, no, not just the shame of your child doing it, but the shame that you feel, and that would explain why his defensive response of I have to react to this negatively because this brings shame upon me for raising a child like that.
yeah, I mean, like I understood everything the parent did. And as we started talking about it, the child, I don't know at what point the child got it, but the child broke down and started crying and said, I never recognized that by stealing, I had shamed my father, and recognized what they had done. And at that moment, they were so ashamed of themselves. And that ended that, and that child has never stolen again or even thought of it. I mean, it changed their entire life. And that was like a moment where I know I used shame, but it wasn't like I want you to be ashamed of what you did. It's like, no, I want you to understand the shame of what you put on your parent. And so that was like, but to me it's like it was done. It was a done deal. But actually, the only reason I'm telling the story is because the child now tells that story, and that's the only reason why I would tell it now.
I don't know if it's as ubiquitous as everybody, but I had that exact same experience growing up. I was the kid in the story. I stole candy, and my mom walked me back into the store and forced me to apologize to the store manager.
I think a lot of parents do that, because I had the same thing happen to me too. And my dad walked me back.
So I'll ask you about this, since you both had the same situation. Do you ever have a worry then that what is actually being taught is to lie better, steal better, be more deceptive?
No, actually, I didn't know.
Because maybe I'm the busted person, because that's what my brain goes to when
no, for me, no, because I don't know about Aaron, but when I was walked back, my father explained to me, he was just because my father was like, you have no idea what that cost that store owner. You took something from somebody that wasn't yours, and you don't do that, because that cost that person something. You don't know what that cost them. You don't ever take anything that doesn't belong to you. And I was ashamed of myself for that. I didn't, it wasn't that lie better, steal better. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed, and I truly was humble. And the thing is that the store owner and I actually became friends. I later worked for them for the summer. It was, yeah.
I could see how that could happen, where you would take away the opposite message of what it was intended. It didn't happen to me. But that being said, I have heard plenty of stories of kids that, especially when they're being shamed for things that they don't have any control over and shouldn't be shamed for in the first place, like being gay, that you learn to just hide it from your parents rather than actually being shamed for it, which is, obviously not the parents' intent when they do that.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between being shamed for something that you knew was wrong when you did it, as opposed to being shamed for something that you're just confused about. It's like I'm just like I'm confused about something. Like I'm not really sure. Like there's that gray area. Like is it wrong? I don't know. And then my parents are like, no, that was wrong. And it's like, it wasn't. There's that gray area, but then there are some things that you absolutely know are wrong, and your parents are like, "Oh, that was wrong," and you knew it was wrong when you did it, because you knew it was wrong when you did it. So yeah,
I agree. So like, there's a verse in Isaiah that says, "Instead of your shame, you receive like a double portion. So instead of your disgrace, you rejoice." Turning that bad, sad, shameful moment into one that is like, hey, life is better this way. I think sometimes what I struggle with, and I'm not pushing it back against your examples, because obviously they worked. You're both great people. I was a particularly deceptive. I actually still am a deceptive person if I give into my inner inclinations. I thankfully, as I talk about with the neuroplasticity, have a greater pathway going down one way. So I've circumvented that deceptiveness within myself. But I am I admit that it's there. I still have a really problematic element of myself that I have learned to avoid. and coached myself out of. And so like, and we talked about this before, but this is why you got to treat kids as individuals, right? Like it's not one size fits all. Like some people like might get better. So some all of a sudden that just terrorizes them, or as you mentioned, Aaron, like might just drive them to hide it better. Even if it is like in your cases, you listed some sins that aren't really sins, but in my case, like actual sins where it's just like, you just got to get better at hiding this, and it eventually you just, I just decided, I can't even say it was a moment, but I just didn't want to live like that anymore. I think the lack of genuineness got to my soul a little bit, like, by seeing the whole world as like puppets on strings, you kind of don't react to, you don't have a connection to a puppet, you know what I mean? Like you do a human being. And so, you kind of learn to cut the strings and everything. And that's just on me. But there was this idea that what we should do is take where there's that shame and find a way to make that the double portion, that where this is a weakness, not only will it be fixed or mended, but even made better, right? Like to even say, like, I've had this experience and now I'm going to, like when you mentioned getting shamed, like in front of the store owner, that you just say, now I want to live with like extra honesty. Before I was just living with what I could get away with, and I didn't think I could get away with it. So a lot of people may have this whole, I would steal it if I get away with it, but I can't mentality that you don't have because they never had an encounter like this, because they just assume they could never get away with it. I think there's a lot of people who
I wonder if there's a difference between the childhood experience that Patty and I are talking about getting shamed over candy in a parent-child relationship that's healthy versus an unhealthy situation of any dynamic, or a peer-to-peer situation where they're just fundamentally different things. And I mean, I've heard horror stories of like, there's a Twitter thread that goes around like every year but it's a recurring thing that's been going on for like a decade, of like some kid who was bullying a kid that got cancer because the cancer was bald and everything like that. And so the parent shaved his head. And I think that's overkill. I think that's a step too far. But
what are you saying about people with shaved heads, Aaron? Think carefully.
I think that everybody has the consent to shave their head on their own, or that's totally fine. But forcing it upon others, or like forcing any sort of major cosmetic change on others, is not good. But I wonder if there's a difference between a parent shaming a child in a constructive way versus peers shaming each other, even if they think that it's constructive. I wonder if there's a fundamental difference there.
Probably. I mean, every relationship and dynamic is different. So I guess we would just have to, explore, that. And we're never getting away from every individual being a unique, crafted, handmade person that God loves, right? And so and that involves talking to them differently. So I remember, I could bring it up, but just a specific situation where I got caught in a lie. And I wouldn't say, I don't even blame my parents, because it's not like it taught me to lie better. I think I was just going to continue to lie, and that getting caught just kind of gave me more parameters for how to lie better, until I eventually decided to just stop, right? But I'm not sure that they could have done something that would have changed it. I wasn't ashamed, but it didn't cause me to change course. And I just don't think that in that instance that shame was going to work. But I don't mean to, again, that is not to refute what you guys are saying. This is a tool at your disposal. It obviously works for some people. It's just something else to consider.
Well, actually, I mean, let's dig into this a little.
Sure.
So, because Aaron and I are talking about, we were ashamed of our stealing. And so our parents walking us back, that mattered to us, and it changed our behavior. However, what I think I hear you saying is like in your situation, you weren't ashamed of your behavior. You just, and so your response was, you know what, I'm going to try to figure out how to do this better so that I don't get caught, so that I can do it more. Which, so when we're talking about like healthy shame, this is what we're talking about with healthy shame, is like recognizing, when we talked about earlier, it's like recognizing that, wait a minute, this is an unhealthy behavior and I need to change this, and I need to figure out how to change this so I can be a better person. That's healthy shame, where, we're talking about a person who doesn't feel any shame for their behavior at all. And what they just do when called out on their behaviors, they just say, well, okay, this is socially unacceptable. I have to figure out how to do this better so I can continue this socially unacceptable behavior.
Yeah, and I would say that's probably accurate. That my shame was public humiliation. Really no shame. It wasn't. I can't believe I lied. It was. I can't believe I got caught.
Yeah, so that's not really shame. That's actually regret. I mean,
that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
and maybe that's then a different feeling. Yeah. Aaron, to your point, so the most positive verses that I could find usually didn't use the word guilt, but did use the word shame. And this is hearkening back to what you're talking about with talking to other Christians. And that is something that Paul specifically says in some of his epistles, and was like, I am saying this to your shame. Like that this is something, like this is a failing that we have that we should feel some shame about. Now, of course, wants them to get better, wants them to improve, but it is appropriate to be like, hey, this is kind of a shameful thing happening for you here, that like you're being judgmental, you're being non-temperate, you're being belligerent, you're really, I mean, just thinking of all the various churches and the problems that they would have come up.
I'm reminded of Paul laying into the church. I don't remember which epistle it was, but laying into the church over the fact that they were like mandating circumcision when in other Levitical law, when like we're past that. Why are you bothering with this stuff? This is about Jesus. This isn't about your personal bugaboos,
Interesting way to refer to circumcision.
Bugaboos.
It's going to be my new word for circumcision.
The great bugaboo. Yeah. I mean, and this is, I am with you, Aaron, and I'm telling you this as a guy who majored in theology. I blend the epistles together in my head, because to me, I understand, like, for passing a test, I'm sure at one point I would have been able to tell you the difference between all of them, but ultimately the Bible is written to Hody. It is not written to them. And so I make it about me, and all the lessons are about me. So to me, like, establishing those differences, like it's gone. I don't have it anymore. I would have to relearn it in order to pass them. To my shame. I've been taught and I've forgotten. But yeah, I think that there's a point there when it would be, yeah, like with the whole fighting about circumcision thing. And is that the time when Paul says, I wish they just cut the whole thing off?
I'm pretty sure that was said at some point.
We're talking about the most. I was watching this thread that was the most hilarious stories in the Bible, and that one had plenty of upvotes. That there's part where Paul's like, "You're so concerned about chopping your wiener, just chop the whole thing off so we can stop having this debate." I'm just like, oh, fantastic!
Hey, well, that's drastic.
Right up there with Jesus telling people to gouge their eyes out if they couldn't behave themselves.
Right. Oh yeah, sure. That makes a. Yeah, I enjoy some cheeky Bible humor that is there. Sometimes they even try to like get rid of it, but I'm glad that it's there. There's one. We even read it the other day. I think it's in Isaiah, but what he's talking about, like people that are just like, and it uses a bunch of words, and of course it's Hebrew, but it's like jibber jabber, gobble gobble gobble. Like it's a bunch of nonsense words that are actually there, and actually try like seeing how people translate that. Sometimes they try to like professionalize it a little bit, but I kind of like that it's just like chirpity chirpity chirp chirp chirp, and I'm like, oh, that's good. That's good. I think we should leave it that way, like, yeah, preserve that for me. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, obviously.
That was Jesus that said it, right? It's going to bug me now that I don't know off the top of my head. Gouge your eyes out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's if your left hand caused you to sin, like cut it off. So that
Yeah.
that's Jesus. All right. Anything that I didn't cover so far as guilt and shame? We cruised through this a little faster, I think, because I was expecting a little more debate on this one, but I feel like we're kind of a mind on this
Well,
particular matter.
Actually, I want to just kind of bring up something that I have noticed though about guilt and shame is that I noticed that a lot of times you can and this is where you really have to come with love to people, is that sometimes you can really tell how somebody has been an adult has been raised by how they interact with love and shame and guilt and shame. And if you find somebody that that they use that a lot in their interpersonal negotiations, that probably tells you a lot about how they were raised. And that's something that you really should approach with a lot of love and care. And like for example, if you're with somebody and like a lot of us, well, not a lot of us, but sometimes you will meet somebody that their go-to in a relationship is to shame you. Because this is how they were raised. And this is what to them is what motivates you, or this is what will get you to where they think you should be. And so to them, this is how they show love. And it's little things. And when I say it, I know like people will recognize it. It's like like, what are you doing that's so great? You should be doing more for this, or you should be working harder, or you should be doing this and this, because if you do this and this, then I'll love you more, or you'll be better, or you'll be more respected, or whatever. And when you find people in your relationships doing that, instead of like reacting with anger or annoyance or whatever, you utilize like that type of Christian love and recognize that this is probably what was in their world and how they learned love. And so when we're talking earlier about like the wood chipper and pedophiles and how you have to love people and give them a safe harbor, that's another place where you have to give safe harbors to people, because if they've been taught that love is shaming people, they have to unlearn that. And that's something that we have to be very patient with people.
Yeah, I don't want to sign everybody up for the process, and something that I've done specifically with the Love First Christians is to invite some people in that have problems, right? Like imperfect people, because everybody's gonna have problems, right? And like as far as I'm concerned,
perfect.
right? If you break one law, you break all laws, right? Like we're all sinners, so whatever, like. But I understand that there's some stuff that like it's a bridge too far, or like you can't have a real productive conversation with somebody if their intent, like I look at, say, the Pharisees, why weren't they like chilling in the back room with Jesus when they were chilling? Well, their purpose was trying to undermine him. Right. So like having them around is not really healthy. But they are like, we have had some people, and I talked about this in the conversation last week, but how we just had no, I actually had it with a conversation with a friend. I'm sorry. Just a couple days ago. And she's part of the Love First Christians as well. And was just talking about how there's somebody who we know of who joined the group who was rabidly anti-trans, right? Now, they didn't say it in the group or anything like that, but I'd seen the posts, I knew of their behavior or whatever. And this person has since come around and corrected their behavior and talked about how listening to some of the people in the group and meeting some of the trans people in the group changed their mind on the matter, right? And so like there's this balance here between like I want to be a place that invites somebody like that, but I know if I bring 100 of those people in all at once, would just become an anti-trans group, right? So there's like some balance required here, that if I bring people in, and when we bring people in, we maintain that we still want to fix them. Patty, like you're saying, like we want them to know that door is wide open, even if you're like a murderer, right? Like, let's just go for the mother of all sins, right? Like a murderer, right? I want you to know that God loves you. Yeah. You're a child of God. You're a wonderful person. You are a wonder of creation. You are somebody who God loves enough to die for, even if you never repent of your murder. But I still want you to find a place where you can get that healing love, and a place that encourages you to change, right? Like, like in a healthy way that like gives you a place where you say, okay, I see how that's wrong now. This is what I wanted. Oh, I'm glad I got back on this because I want to talk about this earlier. The prison system is a great example of how to not do things right, because the recidivism rate is bananas, right? We're not like, we are teaching people, we punish them. We certainly shame them. We rub their noses in it. This is by far the most, by percentage, the place you're most likely to get molested is if you find yourself in a prison, right? Now, if we talk about sheer numbers, it's home, public schools, and then churches. Unfortunately, again, to our shame, Christians, fix your churches. It should be a very safe place, not what it is now. But prisons are like to the point where like men's rape rates are higher than women's, if you've ever heard that, pretty much because of prisons, right? Like, so we shame them, we throw them into gross situations, we punish them, brutalize them. And what do they learn for their troubles? Odds are they're gonna do whatever they did before again. We did nothing effective.
We teach them how to be better criminals.
Right. And we're taking decades out of these people's lives. Man, if you give somebody a decade-long timeout and you have the ability to change them, like they are completely in your control for that decade. There's nothing they can do, right? Like they're not allowed to be free. They're not out and about. And you manage to make that person a worse person. Your system is fundamentally flawed. And this is the same issue that I see with Christianity is we get these sinners, and everybody we get is a sinner, right? We're sinners fixing sinners, for goodness sake, right? So everybody who comes inside our doors is a sinner. And what we do is we too often make them worse by what we try to do. And we try to justify it with this or the other, this or the other Bible tactics. But bottom line is, if the seed is good, the fruit has to be good. So when we look at our fruits and see that they're bad, then we have to challenge our seed. Now that seed is not Christ. That seed is getting away from Christ. So I don't want to make this sound like, oh, this is a Christian problem because Christ is the problem. That's not the seed. The seed is that shame cycle, that guilt cycle, that judgment cycle, that evil, that thing that the devil tells you, it's okay to do this. It's okay. It's all right. They're bad people. You're better than them. Yeah, wood chippers. Yeah, you're better than a murderer out there. Go ahead and gossip. That doesn't have any problematic elements at all. You've earned the right. It's just a little gossip. At least you're not out doing those really bad sins to the point where your gossip and your judgment and all these little lesser sins have corrupted your church to the core, where you can't even see when a huge sin like priests molesting children or a Christian president blowing up 100,000 innocent people overseas has become a Christian problem, right? Because you've turned a blind eye so many times and you're just not seeing it. And so I'm not saying to reject Christ, but what I'm saying is we need to fundamentally reform the way we handle sinners. I bring up with the Love First Christians and the changes that I've seen from people as a good way to do it by being like, this is the way we need to handle it. But even more than changing other people, starts with changing with ourselves. That shame that we should feel when we fail, it's so much higher than the world's shame. Listen, a kid gets molested in the public schools. It's a shame. It's a terrible thing. But I have no control over them. They are not my community. They're not my culture. They're run by people. I guess I'll save that for a different time or whatever, but they are run by people who do not have our best interests at heart. They're run by others, right? My church, where people are like the third most likely to be molested in their lives, that's my people. They are doing it with a cross, the same cross that I say that I worship, up on their sermon wall on Sundays. They are reading out of the same Bible that I use. They are using the same language that I use. So these people are infinitely more my problem than the others, because until a Christian church is the safest place you could ever be, until it's the most non-judgmental, loving, compassionate, encouraging place that you can be, until it's feeding all the hungry and clothing all the naked and housing all the houseless, then I have work to do in my four walls. I don't need to shame anybody else. I've got enough shame as it is. I've got plenty of shame being a part of this church that has been the source of so much damage to people's lives. And that is something that is within my sphere to change. And so this, and like Paul says, like, to your shame. And yeah, it's to our shame. And this is kind of the one instance, as Aaron mentioned, that maybe we need to feel a little bit more shame until it springs us into action. I don't want this, again, I don't want this to be a miserable, grotesque process. I don't feel shame. I mean, I'm ashamed of those things that I mentioned, but this is not a personal shame for me. Instead, it inspires me to do better. I'm a very joyful worker in this cause. I'm happy to be part of the solution for this issue. But it definitely is an issue, and it is because of that shame, I would say it is the highest on my priority list to fix. More so than, just as Caesar wasn't very high on Christ's priority list, but the temple, that was high on Christ's priority list. Same thing today. I don't have any control of government, presidents, and school systems and prisons and all this other thing, but I absolutely have a lot of pull within my church, even if you don't want to say within like the church broadly, within your community, within your family's church, within your faith groups. Like you, if you are a fellow Christian, that's where your sphere of influence is. That's where you have pull. And you need to exercise that pull until you make these Christian churches what Paul's vision was for those churches. Because those problems, they're deadly. It doesn't end with, you don't say it's just a little judgment, it's just a little gossip. What might it be? This is the plank in our eye. Fix it.
I totally agree with all that. And, and also, to take it one step further and don't become the plank in somebody else's, don't become a plank while fixing it. So like there's nothing worse than turning judgmental as you're fixing the problem, right? I mean, and this is, because I just want to say, because, everything you're saying, I totally agree with. And I was like that person, like, I'm going to fix this church. However, I became the judgmental, like people beware. You can go you down a noble path and go down it wrong, So you've got, and this is where wisdom and where you really need God, right? I mean, this is really where the Spirit of the Lord guides us, because it's so easy that when you go in there and you see like really with spiritual eyes, and you start seeing all the problems that is there, and God will open your eyes if you ask him to, and it's a terrible awakening. And you can say like, oh my God, nobody else is doing this but me, and that's a moment. And then you start like judging other people who aren't doing it. And then you start getting judgmental. Like, why aren't you doing this? And then you start shaming people for not doing what you're doing. And so like, you have to be really careful about that. And this is where it's like, there are ways to help your community, help your church, and help change things without judging others and shaming others who aren't there with you. And bring them into the fold so that they want to work with you in this. And so it's like, be really, really careful on this stuff. And we started this off by saying, nobody who's ever been shamed has enjoyed it. This isn't how you bring people in, right? I mean, you work and you bring people in with love first, and then you work through that, right?
Yeah. Right. Encourage them to do the work to get through it and leave that shame behind.
Right. I mean, this is what it's all about. Loving first. Always love first.
Always love first. That should be your gut instinct. That is the God instinct, to love first.
Yes.
And if you're doing the love, everything's going to be fine. It'll be fine. Yeah, I don't really have much more here. I know we're a little early, but I don't know if we want to close, but is there anything else, any subjects that you wanted to talk about that I didn't get to yet when it comes to shame? Because I think I'm out of steam on this one. I think I've said what I wanted to say.
Shame's a harsh one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. It's a harsh one, because it's a divisive one. I mean, and it's people are fragile. And here's the thing with shame is that it creeps up on you all the time. I mean, the hardest thing with shame, when you have true shame, real shame, and I'm speaking to all the people who have it, because I have it too, is that it sits in the back of your head, and you just got to ask God to help you get rid of that. I mean, help you, teach you how to work through it, teach you how to get rid of it, and then teach you just, how to have him show you how he forgave you so you can forgive yourself. Well,
I'm sorry, I'm muted. Aaron, anything else you want to say? Anything that I missed?
I don't have anything else. I agree with you. I kind of ran out of steam myself.
The opposite of talking in tongues, right? That I just did. When you talk and nothing comes out. Nobody understands you. Yeah, I guess, I'll just deliver some closing thoughts then. To me, I would take a careful look to see how many people that guilt and shame led them away from the church and away from God, and understand that is not a small number. And if we have a goal of making people closer to God, then we need to take that problem very seriously. Yes. Top tier serious. People don't want to return to a place where they feel guilt and shame. I brought this up earlier, but I'm going to bring it up again, that if you read the thing of the parable of the prodigal son, and just imagine that father hounded every day, just be like, you're so bad with money, stupid. How are you so dumb? You're so awful. That when he's run out of luck, why would he go back home?
Yeah.
Like I would rather eat out of a pigsty than live under a roof with somebody who's in charge of that roof, who holds that guilt and shame over me all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not alone. Like, we want to think that like physical material needs are all that matters. Like, that's not even close to true. Like, and my apologies to all the to all the political philosophers out there who just like only care about meeting people's physical needs. But like emotional, spiritual needs are just as important. And people need to feel a place where they feel that, yes, maybe they've sinned, but there's an avenue to letting that go. An avenue, again, to be seen as somebody who's not condemned. Would you stand up for a sinning child the way that Christ is going to stand up before God on your behalf, as we're told in Romans, that he's going to not condemn you and that he's going to intercede on your behalf and deliver his best defense of you as that he possibly can? Because my guess is if you deliver your best defense for your child when they make a mistake, that you are not going to shame and guilt them. You're going to feel empathetic for them. You're going to understand them better. You're going to say, oh, you know why they probably stole? I'll bet this was the reason. You know why they lied? Probably this reason. And you're going to understand them, their personalities, and I can't tell you what that reason is, because every human being's different, right? Like different motivations to sin, different reasons to make mistakes, right? We're all different people. And maybe the solution's not the same either, but at the very least, you will raise your child in a home, and you will, and I don't want this to be about children. You'll have family members and I mean, heck, your grandparents. Like, people belittle their grandparents in public. I went to the store. Every time I go to the store, there's always some teenager yelling at their grandfather about how slow they're being, or some, like, just something. Oh. And it's just an aside being like, that's the wrong milk, grandpa. You know what I mean? Kind of thing. And it hurts me, right? Like, yeah. That's not a good cycle to be in. Like, whether it's like kids, grandparents, friendships, family, friends, coworkers, do you want to be the person that controls people with shame? And that doesn't even control them, because really it just makes them worse, as we've talked about. Or you want to be the person that...
interject? If it does control them, think about what kind of person that makes you. I mean, we're just going to, like, my God, really? You're a monster. I'm just going to say it, man. If you are controlling people with shame, you are literally the definition of a monster. Congratulations. You just graduated to monster. Congratulations. Yeah. You win.
I referenced a person that I talked to on social media, how they just assumed that guilt was intrinsic to the Christian faith. How it was just
Yeah.
there's no way around it. Like to
Yeah.
them, and I know it's not from the Bible because I mean I've read all these Bible verses about leaving guilt and shame behind and how that's like a huge goal, right?
Yeah.
And the feeling of guilt and shame, leave it behind. Not even like having guilt and shame, but even the feeling, the regret, all that is supposed to be left behind. But I know why this person believes it. It's in our culture, right?
Yeah.
Like it's been preached to him, you know. And so when I talked with him and I asked for him like his description of what he felt the Christian God was, I said I wouldn't believe in that God either.
Yeah.
How many of you Christians would actually agree with more people when they talk about their experiences in these churches and this, again, guilt, condemnation, constant like just putting down? How many of you would just be like, you know what? I don't want to do that either. No fun.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not. This gets into, I'm glad we brought psychology into this. Like we talked about neurology, but also just basic psychology and how people work. And the shame process, it's not work. You might get somebody to guilt into changing their attitude, that what they do, their behavior like one time.
Yeah.
Right. But this is not something that's going to be long term. And it's certainly not something that's going to manifest into a real close relationship with God, because they're doing it because of fear of you. They're doing it because of, as I mentioned, fear of their life, fear of their social circles. This is not a genuine relationship with God. This is not the Holy Spirit guiding them and teaching them to do right. This is you, and you're threatening them
It's
in order to
manipulation. It's
right.
Yeah.
It's manipulation. And
yes,
this is not
terrible.
the way God works.
Right.
This is an eternal process. This is not, you know, even if you go through life being threatened until you die into saying you're a Christian, that's not the end of things.
Wait, and can I just say this? If you're doing this to anybody, you're not working for God. You're not. I don't care how much you get them to do what you want. You're not working for God. Don't ever kid yourself to think you're working for God.
Yeah.
You're not, period. You're not. When you shame, hurt, destroy, and emotionally manipulate people, you're not working for God. You're not. God even says it. So that I'm going to say my judgmental thing. That's not me saying it. That's God. Take it up with God.
Right. Make it. Yeah.
Anyways, go ahead, Matt.
No, that's all right. That's basically all I have. Yeah, you're doing some good work for the devil. Please don't work for the devil anymore.
Not knock yourself out, you know.
I believe
the Bible, he's loving it.
The Bible says about the devil, his ways are not our ways.
Yeah.
Not just like the results, but the way he does things is different. Right? So like the way, like it's not just this destination we need to talk about. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, right? Like the way that Christ operates is in love, is in leaving your shame, your worries, your stress, all that at the door, and come on in and let's get you better.
Yeah.
And the devil is sinking, shame, guilt, death,
manipulation,
fear, manipulation, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you might say, well, maybe I can use this in a way that brings people to God. And we are promised in the Bible that's just not how it works. That's just not the way it goes.
Yeah.
This is the way of the devil is different than the way of Christ. Like there is no ends justifying the means.
Yeah.
There's never any ends. It's all means. Life continues on. Right.
Can I just say something? Because this means, and I know, you know, where we leave, and I don't want to keep this going because I know everybody wants to leave. But you know, one of the things that really got me out of my like judgmentalness is that moment where I was going through a very hard time. It was with my divorce, very hard time, and I was getting ready to do something extremely manipulative, and it was because I wanted a certain outcome. And I stopped and I realized that what I was about to do was to manipulate another human being into doing something that I knew was not what they wanted, but I knew how to emotionally manipulate them to get what I wanted because I just wanted a result. And I stopped and I thought, you know, stop doing this. You have to stop doing this because if you have to manipulate another person and do all this stuff, one, you're not trusting God in the outcome, and two, you're forcing another person to do something against their will because they, in the end, you're going to revert back to the way things were, and this is so unfair to everybody. And I had to finally just stop and say, you know what, God, I don't like who I've become, and I don't like any of this. And it was something that was like, and again, I was very ashamed of myself because when I recognized like who I'd become, it was like, it's very hard now for me to like I have to like accept things, because I know like it's very easy. You can manipulate things. You can give people what they want to get the outcomes that you want. But it's like, no, that's not right. You have to allow people freedom of choices and freedom to make their own decisions. And you have to give them authenticity because that's what God is. And that's how God acts. And if people don't want that, that's okay. And that sucks. And I know it hurts, but it's like, you know what? That's the right way to live your life. It's the authentic way because you love them enough to allow them the right to make the right choices based on the truth, not on a lie that you're presenting people. And that's love. It sucks, but it's love.
It's the harder path. Like it's
Right.
just it's more difficult, right?
Right.
Like guilt and shame come naturally to us most of the time because we had somebody do it to us when we were young.
Yeah,
So
and manipulation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really easy to pick that up as a tool and utilize it that way.
But when you really love somebody, you are authentic and you are honest, and that is what love really is being authentic and being honest and always being true 100% so that people can make real choices in their life, even if those real choices mean they don't want you in their life. And you have to give them that option because you have to trust to God that, okay, this is the right choice and the right path for my life. And it's tough. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. Aaron, anything you want to say before we called it a day?
No, I'm just happy to be here.
Well, Patty, Aaron, thanks both so much for being here. Everybody's tuning in, listening to the end. Thank you so much. Again, numbers grew throughout the episode. I appreciate y'all willing to listen and talk and share your feelings with us. If you want to join, again, link in that description. All faiths, all political persuasions, all walks of life. We welcome you to the Love First Christians. If you have any questions, real great place to ask them really tough questions, share any sensitive life experiences. It's a really good place. You'll find a good community that's really, really good at turning people around for the better. Thank you all so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your week. We will go back to studying the Old Testament next week. Sorry, what were you going to say, Patty?
I guess did we decide what Old Testament next week?
We do not have a book yet, so that'll be something. If you'd like some influence in that, you should join the Love First Christians and have some sway over which book we talk about. So we'll talk about that in the group after this. Everybody, enjoy the rest of your week. It was a pleasure talking to you all, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.